Consistency is key. 100%. In relation to the overall success, consistency is one of the main ingredients that cannot be removed from the process. Otherwise, failure is what most people can come to expect. And so, yes, absolutely. Consistency on the medications while you're withdrawing from them. Otherwise, unless you like, going down rocky roads, it gets a little more bumpy. But, the more consistent you are with it, the smoother the transition will be off of the medication. But then also, obviously, the consistency on the Empower Plus, because as you're coming off that medication, what's replacing it? What's generating the support within the brain, making you function? And so the Empower Plus is absolutely crucial.
Hey, welcome to the Upside of Bipolar. I am your host, Michelle Reidinger, and I am on the third episode in a row with David Stephan from Truehope. Over the past 22 years, David Stephan has worked extensively with Truehope, an organization on a mission to help individuals overcome mental illness through the use of groundbreaking micronutrient solutions. During this time, he has been involved in leading-edge discoveries that have not only provided significant transformation in thousands of lives, but have also been scientifically validated in dozens of independent studies from universities around the world. As such, David feels it a privilege and a duty to share the knowledge that not only changed his life, but has also allowed for well over 100,000 others to transform their lives as well. David, I can't wait for this episode. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again for having me on. And I think I need to rewrite my bio because it sounds like how I speak and not everybody speaks that way. So it's a bit of a tongue twister sometimes.
Well, it's great. And I if anybody is listening to this as a standalone episode and you haven't heard the previous two episodes, please go back and listen to them. The reason we broke this up into 3 episodes, and they're actually quite long episodes, we probably could have broken it up even more. But the first episode that I interviewed you on, well, this is in this most recent 3. I interviewed you a couple of years ago for the first time, but in this most recent 3, we started with the story of Truehope and how this micronutrient was, the micronutrient treatment was discovered, how the company came about, some of the challenges you faced. And then in the second episode, we talked about why micronutrients are so effective in helping people resolve the underlying sources of their symptoms that lead to a bipolar diagnosis, and not just bipolar, but ADHD, OCD, even schizophrenia, that micronutrients are so effective. And we talked about why they were so effective. And so today we are going to talk about what the symptoms actually mean. When somebody starts to take micronutrients, a lot of times, because we have created categories, we have created diagnoses, disorders out of clusters of symptoms. We have pathologized these symptoms to make and people then believe that they are experiencing a disease or an underlying etiology when they experience these symptoms. And so the problem that creates is that when somebody starts to take the micronutrients and their brain starts to heal and they still are experiencing symptoms, they freak out and think they're, for bipolar, people who are struggling with bipolar, they think, oh no, my bipolar is coming back, or oh no, this isn't working. And that's probably most often not true. In my experience, and you have, way more experience than I do because you've been doing this for over 20 years, but in my experience, what I actually see is that people don't understand the symptoms they're experiencing and what's actually happening. And so today I want to talk about the different types of symptoms you will experience if you start taking micronutrients, what they actually mean, and how that actually often is a sign that the micronutrients are working. So I'm super excited about this conversation because I see this objection often. People will say, I tried micronutrients and they didn't work for me. And I always want to say, let's talk about that, because micronutrients aren't a medicine. It's just something naturally occurring that our brain needs. And you're just giving your brain what it needs to function in a healthy way. It's not like a pill or a medicine, a medication. It's just something your brain naturally needs. And you're just making sure that your brain's getting enough of it. Often most people are not getting enough, right?
Exactly. I mean, when we put it in the classification of essential nutrients, meaning that it's actually essential to the very functions that keep you alive, it's important to put it in that category, because when somebody says, "Oh, I tried micronutrients and they didn't work," well, what didn't work about them, right? What was actually taking place, or why didn't they work? Because micronutrients always work if they get to where they need to go, plain and simple, right? Like they don't work, they work. It's just what's going on either in your gut health or what was conflicting, where and that's why we go through limiting factors with our support protocols, where we will, in essence, if they're not working or something pops up randomly, we start to go through like a kind of like a detective and finally figure out that's what's going on. And that matches the symptoms. Here we go, right? And then we're able to then address it, correct it, and get it working again. Because micronutrients always work if they are where they need to be.
Right. And so let's start. I think the first thing we need to talk about actually is how psychotropic drugs actually work in the brain, like what these different categories of drugs are actually doing, and why, if you're taking them still and you start taking an adequate level of micronutrition, why you could actually start experiencing symptoms, like what's actually happening in the brain. So let's start first with, there's a lot here, so I don't want to like ask you these multifaceted questions that are complicated. Let's start with the drug categories. So I don't want to get into too much detail about these, but let's just kind of talk about general drug categories and what's actually happening with those drugs.
Fantastic. And I'll just right off the bat here, I'll say I'm nowhere near as much of an expert in relation to how the drugs work in the brain. Whereas if you were listening to the previous podcast, you'd hear that I understand a fair bit about how nutrients are working in the brain. I tend to focus more on the solutions than the problems, if you will. And unfortunately, in this sense, the drugs are oftentimes the problem. So I'll just put that out as a caveat that don't expect the same out of me, the same level of intellect in relation to exactly what the drugs are doing in the brain compared to what the micronutrients are doing in the brain. So general classes of medications that we work with. The first thing is, as a overall umbrella, we're talking about psychiatric medications. Those are the medications that we've had to, over the last almost 3 decades, develop support protocols to help people come off of them safely and effectively, because the vast majority of the people coming to us were on a psychiatric medication or a number of psychiatric medications. So it's a pretty broad sweeping umbrella. In essence, that's just mood altering or brain altering medications is really what that is, that are working on the central nervous system, that type of thing, that are having that type of impact. Whereas, you have your heart medications, that type of thing that we haven't had to deal with as much, right? Because, well, it hasn't been something that's been conflicting. Although we do see people sometimes will reduce down or completely off of other medications like that just by simply taking the proper nutrition. But it's never been of the concern that the psychiatric medications have been. We have our anti-anxiety medications. We have our antidepressants. We have just general mood stabilizers, anti-seizure medications or anticonvulsants. Your stimulants, which may not be as well known in relation to that classification of medications, but that's your Adderall, Concerta, Dexedrine, Ritalin, that type of thing, anything for ADHD. And then antipsychotics, which is obviously what you're going to find with people that are in psychosis or schizophrenia. They're going to be on them. And then the one that oftentimes people won't classify in the psychiatric medications, but it's working along the same levels, is your sleep aids as well. And those can actually be really quite nasty to try to come off of. And once again, it's working on a similar level because you have some of these medications working to affect serotonin levels, but melatonin comes from serotonin. And so when you're taking a sleep aid, you're working on almost the same level. It's just that it's, trying to focus in on more on the melatonin aspect. And so the addictive nature of a sleep aid is actually quite high compared to, let's say, even just a general mood stabilizer or a simplistic antidepressant, if you will. And then in that whole mix, you also have your benzodiazepines, which are about as bad as they come, really, is what we found. And it's not just us that have found that. I want to kind of digress for a brief moment here. we ended up getting our hands on this little booklet that was issued by Health Canada back in like 1976, if I recall properly. Small booklet, but a booklet nonetheless, specifically on the use of benzodiazepines when they were first being introduced to the marketplace. And it was a booklet that was being given out to doctors, an educational booklet. And within that booklet, there was a very strict instruction specifying that these medications were not to be taken for a duration beyond 2 weeks. The reason why is because of how addictive they were. And it was easily identified how addictive they were. Yet we see that booklet disappeared out of circulation. We see that warning would no longer be communicated or adhered to. And people have been on benzos for years. And now you try to get them off, and it's an uphill battle. It's a lot of work. It's well worth it, but it's a lot of work in relation to people that have been on these medications for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm going to say here is Professor Joanna Moncrief, I've interviewed twice on my podcast, and has done tremendous work in helping people actually understand what these drugs do, how they work in the brain, and how to safely taper off of them. She talks about how all of those names for drug categories are actually marketing names. They are not accurate as far as what is actually happening. They are used as a marketing tool to deceive people, really, into believing that it's anti-anxiety, so it's going to stop my anxiety, or it's antidepressant, so it's going to stop my depression, or antipsychotic, it's going to stop my psychosis. And she said that there is no scientifically valid reason for those names. They are simply marketing tools, so that people, when they take them, they get this idea that that these drugs are doing something that they really are not. That there is more scientific validity to the drug than they have based on even the testing, right? And one of the things, I am going to mention this here too, the more I learned about medications and how they worked, the more I've been able to go back into my story and look at the symptoms that I was experiencing and start recognizing, like my very first major anxiety attack that put me in the hospital for 8 hours thinking I was having a heart attack, and the doctors even thought I was having a heart attack, because my blood pressure was elevated, my heart rate was elevated. There were like all these external indicators, and they did all of the testing, a full workup, and nothing was wrong with my body. And then they decided it was just an anxiety attack. Looking back, that happened at the same time that I was switching medications. The same thing happened when I would go off of medications prior to getting pregnant. You have to go off of medications, and I had to remove my birth control, and I would get severely, severely depressed right as I was getting pregnant. Both times I got pregnant when I was during medication, it was recognized then, not looking back now, I was in withdrawal, but nobody recognized that. Nobody acknowledged that, right? And then postpartum, I had a severe postpartum hyperthyroid condition that was correlated with me starting up my drugs again. Like, I was still taking antidepressants all the way through the pregnancy, but I would start taking the quote unquote mood stabilizers. And as my hormones shifted, and as I started taking these medications and they started changing my chemistry, my body went into hyperthyroidism. Like I told my husband both times, I said, I feel like I'm in high school again. I'm eating and eating and eating, and I'm losing weight. And I was passing out and everything. Like, looking back, most of the problems that I was having were not related to quote unquote bipolar disorder. They were related to the drug action and the withdrawal and the, switching medications and coming off of medications, but nobody acknowledged what was actually happening. And so all of it was dumped into this bucket, so we created this very convenient bucket to blame all of these symptoms on, which is bipolar disorder. So anytime you experience any symptoms at all, it is blamed on your quote unquote disorder. And the problem that creates for people as they want to heal is that anytime they experience the symptoms, there's a psychological dependence on these medications, because you are afraid of the symptoms. And anytime you experience symptoms, you think, oh no, my bipolar's coming back. When that's not reality, it's not true. So I want to talk first about, I think the best thing would be to go through the process somebody goes through when they start with Truehope. So when somebody comes to Truehope, they do an initial intake with you guys. And something that I've learned, and I've made sure that I coach people through whenever they start this process, is you need to tell Truehope everything that you're on, everything, any micronutrients included, because we don't understand, the layperson does not understand how these things interact with each other. We don't understand like what the withdrawal is going to look like. We don't understand any of that. So we need to make sure we give a very clear picture to Truehope of everything that we're taking. And sometimes I think that it's helpful, especially if you have, we had one person one time that had recently titrated down and were experiencing a lot of intense symptoms, which once we talked to Truehope about it, you said, well, you're actually in withdrawal. So before we increase your your supplements, we're going to do some aminos to help get rid of these withdrawal symptoms, help mitigate these, not get rid of, but help mitigate the withdrawal symptoms. So let's talk about that first. So what happens when somebody comes to you and they do this workup with you? Do they start titrating down right away, or what's the first thing that's going to happen with them?
It all depends on the medications that they're working with. And I'm not on the support floor anymore. Once was back in 2007, 2008, overseeing some of the operations there, more on the intake side of things versus the actual support. But it was always, independent or, individual dependent on how the program was going to roll out. So sometimes what would happen, I'll say it's right off the bat, they would never engage in reducing somebody off their medications right off the bat. So what would happen is, typically speaking, is that the individual would get onto the micronutrients, they get onto the Empire Plus, they'd start to ramp up to a dose that's going to start really supporting their mental health. And then, depending on the individual and what the medication was, generally within about a week's time, they would be engaging in their first reduction. And so let's just give an example here. Let's say that it's just SSRI, and this applies to most SSRIs, but not all. Some of them are generally approached with an 8th reduction model, where we will do reductions at 1/8 of the medication per time. But generally speaking, it's a quarter reduction. And so a quarter reduction would occur after about a week or within that week. And then we would wait and we would see what's going on and wait for what is referred to within our head office as medication potentiation, where we start to see that the medication is starting to become overpowering, where they're into a state of overmedication. And then the next withdrawal would take place, or the next reduction would take place from the medication. And then it just persists from there until we can get them off the medication. Now, those are pretty general set of rules. Sometimes if somebody's on medication longer, it could be the same medication as the next person over, but they're getting an 8th reduction because they're much more sensitive. Their dependency on it has increased over the years. And so there's a custom tailoring that takes place in relation to all of this. We use general guidelines, but those general guidelines are there just to provide exactly what that is, general guidelines, not the specifics for that particular individual. And so there's variance that will occur from one person to the next, depending on the various circumstances that led up to them giving us a call and getting onto the micronutrients. And so that's what it would normally look like. They come in, we do the intake, we get all the information that we can get so that we know what we're working with in relation to limiting factors, things that are going to contradict the supplements that they're going to have to eliminate or reduce, even things like alcohol consumption, all that type of stuff, because that's counteractive to the effects of the Empire Plus. And then we'll begin the process of getting them onto the Empire Plus. They receive it in the mail, and then we start to work with them from there. Obviously, if they're in Canada, they may have already purchased it from a health food store, so they have it on hand, and they may already begin taking it. And then, we're going to wait for that time to be able to begin the process of withdrawing them off the medication in the most safe and efficacious way that we know how, which we've developed some pretty good expertise over the years and over the about 100,000 people that we've worked with over the last 3 decades surrounding medication reduction.
Well, and one of the things I want to, anecdotally, when I started, prior to finding Truehope, I had found one other micronutrient or supplement. I shouldn't say micronutrient, but another supplement from an MLM that somebody had recommended. And I started taking it, and it was helping a little bit because I was getting over medicated. I didn't know what over medication was. I didn't understand what was happening, but there was something happening, and it was helping with some symptoms. And so I was taking that prior to starting with Truehope, and I didn't mention it to Truehope when I started. In fact, I didn't talk to them about it for about 2 years because it never occurred to me that something natural was something that I needed to talk to them about. I just this is just another supplement. I'm not going to worry about that. And I told them about all the medications, and I followed all the protocols. And a couple of years in, so just so anybody in the audience knows, if you're working with Truehope, they will call you periodically. If you don't call them and you don't talk to them, they will call you on a periodic basis just to check in with you and see how you're doing. They'll want to update their files and make sure they know everything that you're on and how you've been doing. And they called for one of these. And like I said, I've been on it for a couple of years. And as they were going through updating their file, they asked the question, is there anything else that you're taking? They didn't ask medications. They said, anything else that you're taking? And I said, well, I'm taking this other thing. And they said, oh, well, what is that? So we went through the ingredient list because they weren't familiar with the actual product yet. And when there was something in the ingredient list that they said, you should not be taking that because that actually interferes with the absorption of the Empower Plus. And I was surprised. I was like, really? And so I talked to them. I was kind of curious. I talked to them about it for a little bit, stopped taking it. And within a month, some of the things that I was still struggling with were gone. And I was just, I'm always amazed at how I shouldn't be, but I'm still really in awe and grateful for the expertise that Truehope's customer support has, because over the years, there have been times when I thought I knew better and I would try something and always paid a price for it. And so I got to a point where I'm never go against Truehope's advice. If Truehope tells you to do something, you do it because they understand what they're talking about. They've been doing this for so long. They understand how to make sure that your brain is getting what it needs to function in a healthy way and how to safely remove, the medications. And so let's talk about over-medication a little bit, because I don't think people really understand what this is. If somebody starts taking the Truehope supplements and they do not decrease their medications, they will start experiencing symptoms. And it's different for everybody. It's different based on the medications. It's different based on the individual. But can you talk about, you used a different term. You said over-medication, but there was something that you said. Medication
potentiation is
okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how long they've been using that term for, but that's the term that they use in-house now.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you if this is accurate, because this is what I think is happening. So what I understand happening is that as your brain begins to heal, the medication becomes too much for your healing brain. Is that an accurate way to say that, or?
Yeah, so let me put it this way. So if you're taking an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is preventing the reuptake of serotonin so that you have serotonin available, if you're taking that and then you take Empower Plus, which is enhancing the natural production of serotonin, well, now reasonably you're going to have too much serotonin, right? And you're not going to feel very good. You're going to go into serotonin syndrome. So yes, that's exactly what's going on there. Is the reason why these medications work for certain individuals is because there's something going on in the brain that needs to be addressed. And so, and this is just using the hypothetical that the medication's actually working for them, because many people will get on medications and they don't work. And then they have to jump from one to the next, and then eventually that one seemed to work. And so let's say that hypothetically they're on a medication that has been working for them, and now they get on the Empower Plus. Well, their brain chemistry is normalizing. They're producing, and when I say brain chemistry, I'm talking about the production of neurotransmitters, which in essence are chemicals, if you want to call them that, but that's what they are, is, amino acid based molecules that are doing a job. They're sending and receiving messages. They're communicating. They're really communication enhancers is what they are, telling the body to do certain things or the brain to do certain things. And so keeping everything working in order within the body. And so now the medication is being overdone. So it'd be, in essence, like giving somebody who never had a mental health condition a psychiatric medication. Well, what's it going to do? It's going to dysregulate things. It's going to throw you out of balance. It's going to throw you out of whack, if you will. You're not going to feel well. And you're actually going to end up with mental health symptoms, even though you didn't have mental health symptoms to start off with. So that's taking, if you want to call it, a normal person, a person who doesn't have a diagnosable mental health condition and throw them onto a psychiatric medication at a therapeutic dose, you can anticipate mental health issues to arise. So that's what it's doing. And what's interesting about that is that in the research, they call it the bell-shaped curve. And so you have people that are participants in the research. They're being studied. They're on the Empower Plus. Now, most of these people that were being researched were coming already on medications. And so what the researchers found is that generally by about that day 5 mark is that they had a reduction in symptoms. So symptoms are going down. Hey, that's great. This is looking, there's some statistical reduction in symptoms anyways. Mm-hmm. And it's looking great. But then it tapers off. And then the symptoms start to go up again. And we're talking about mental health symptoms in general here. And the initial response from the doctors involved in the research are saying, whoa, symptoms are returning. We need to increase the medication. When in reality, it was the exact opposite. We need to decrease the medication now. So then, that was the hardest thing to educate a lot of these doctors on because it was so counterintuitive. Symptoms increasing, medication needs to increase. No, symptoms are increasing because they're over-medicated and they're now exhibiting these mental health symptoms. So reduce the medication. Now we go like this, and now we're plateauing. That's when you should do the withdrawal right there. Is if we can identify that there's a flatlining in the symptom evaluation charts, that the symptoms aren't decreasing anymore, because we anticipate that if you persist, it's going to go up, and maybe it starts to go up. Now you reduce the medication, tapers down, and down it goes again, right? And then you can follow that literally. You can just follow this downward step throughout the withdrawal process, where if you don't withdraw fast enough, you're going to start to go up, and then you withdraw, and then you're going to go down again, right? But it's hopefully, if you're doing it at the appropriate rate, it's persistently going down rather than coming back up. But that's exactly what you would anticipate to see if the medications were not withdrawn at an appropriate rate. You would see an increase in symptoms that are synonymous with mental health conditions. And as such, that's where it becomes so counterintuitive, where doctors will look at it and say, symptoms increasing, medication needs to increase, when in fact, it's the exact opposite. The medications were causing the issue.
Right. And so if somebody goes into overmedication, they call Truehope, and Truehope will advise them based on the medications that they're taking, how much to reduce each medication by. If somebody's taking multiple medications, there might be a different amount that each one needs to be reduced by based on, the drug action, based on what withdrawal looks like from that medication. And then when they reduce the medications, they will go into a mitigated withdrawal, but it is a withdrawal. They are going to go into a withdrawal from that medication being reduced, right?
Well, it depends. Because if we're waiting for the medication potentiation to occur, where we're starting to see that the medication's starting to generate those effects, the reduction oftentimes won't create the withdrawal effect or near as much withdrawal effect. Whereas if you preempt it and you're going down, your symptoms are going down, and we haven't even gotten to the plateau yet, and we withdraw at that point, it could be too early. You might get lucky and withdraw just at the right point in time, and you just keep this kind of smooth flowing decrease in symptoms as time goes on. But if you withdraw too quickly, likelihood that you're going to have withdrawal effects are going to increase quite a bit. And so that's why Truehope takes more of that kind of, they try to take the safe approach where we want to wait till we see the medication starting to potentiate, starting to create some symptoms, and then withdraw at that point in time so as to avoid withdrawal effects as much as possible.
Right. And it's really important. One of the things that I do in my program is I teach people to start mapping out what that looks like for themselves so that they can see it. It's really hard when somebody, especially if somebody's been living with this for any kind of extended period of time. In the program, we don't talk about bipolar disorder. We talk about bipolar symptoms. We really actively try to work with the language that is going to help change the way that we view these things. And we talk about how symptoms are information. You're a detective in your life. We're going to figure out what the information is that's coming, that we're receiving from that symptom. And so when they go through this process, I try to make sure that they understand it. I do not advise them. I want to make sure everybody understands that. what I'm doing in the coaching program with this part of the process of healing is teaching them how to use Truehope effectively, how to make sure you're giving them accurate information, that you're calling them when you need to. And, that's our mantra is when in doubt, call Truehope. Like if there's any doubt at all, call Truehope right away, ask them, and they will tell you, just stay the course. This is just normal, or, increase aminos, or, time for a reduction. But we always, that's kind of our mantra in the program is, when in doubt, call Truehope. But it's understanding what these symptoms are actually telling them, so that there's a tendency sometimes I've seen in people to revert back to the idea that this is your bipolar coming back. There's some fear and anxiety surrounding this. Like, what if this isn't going to work? And what if this, what if this, I have my bipolar symptoms come back? It's very scary for some people because they don't want to end up back in the hospital. They don't want to end up, with the symptoms that cause them to do really bad things. Right. And so it's really helpful, I think, for people to understand what's actually happening to them. This is not your bipolar coming back. This is your brain healing. And your medication potentiation or overmedication is happening. And so now it's time this is exciting. Like, this is good news. We're going to reduce a little bit now. And then you're going to level out for a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to just talk here just briefly about what kind of those symptoms can look like, because I don't want people to be afraid that this is going to like throw them into mania, or, that it's going to be a scary experience. What I have seen, and maybe I don't know if you can talk about this, but for me personally, I will share, I started to get depressed when I would get over-medicated. And I also had a really weird thing where I would have depression and fatigue were two main ones for me. But I also had this weird thing where I could taste the medication in my mouth. And I've never heard anybody else talk about it, but that was something really weird for me. It tasted like I had sucked on a pill is what it tasted like to me. And it was, thankfully, once that happened a couple times, I was able to say, I'm over medicated now. And so I would call Truehope. But the first two times it happened, I'm like, what is wrong with me? I don't understand what's happening. And the first time it happened, I called my doctor, and my doctor didn't know what to tell me. And thankfully, he was on board. That is not very common, but my doctor had looked at Truehope's research. And at that point, I had been treated by him for over 8 years, and he was as desperate to find something to help me as I was. And so I was so grateful to that doctor for his willingness to be open. And he looked at Truehope's research, felt like it was good research, and he said, this looks like a viable option. But when it came to going through the withdrawal process, he did not know how to help me. And so the first time I called him, he said, I don't know what to tell you. You need to call Truehope. And from that point on, I just called Truehope each time, because he didn't know how to safely withdraw me from the medication.
Well, they're not learning that in university. They're learning how to put people on medications. They're learning how to switch medications. But when you're working with psychiatric medications, the concept is that these are incurable conditions that will need to be treated for a lifetime. So the whole concept of withdrawing isn't on the table. Hence why they're not being educated on it. They're just, medication isn't working anymore. All right, we're going to do a switch. We're going to switch you over to this type of medication and see if it works. And then that's the general model that's being applied. So unfortunately, that's a sad reality that we see, where you have very well-meaning doctors out there that are not educated in a way that they can best help their patients, especially when somebody's withdrawing off of one of these medications that the model was they were never supposed to get off it in the first place. And so, yeah, it's been a real beautiful, a benefit or a blessing for us to be able to interface with many open-minded doctors and to train them on the protocols over the years. And many of them have used them to, with great success with their own private practices and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I got a little sidetracked there, but I want to talk about some of the other symptoms I've seen. So there's some people will get really agitated. So like really, kind of agitated and like get angry really easily. I have seen, let's see, what are some of the other ones? Fatigue is one that I see regularly. Fatigue and depression. And then the agitation is another one. So what are some other things? Because the one thing that I have seen when it comes to mania, because that seems to be one of the things that people are most afraid of, I have never seen anybody in my experience where they ramped into mania like all of a sudden. And so it is the one person that I saw get manic. She had missed a bunch of doses of medication and micronutrients. And it took time for her to become manic for like weeks. So there were kind of warnings along the way. And I didn't know at the time that she was missing doses. So once looking back, she ended up in the hospital. She, had to stabilize for a few months before she could try again. And she learned her lesson. I was so grateful that she didn't give up, because she's almost done with her taper now and doing really well. Like every time I see her, I'm like, you look so good, but can we talk about a little bit more? I don't know if you know any other kind of over medication type symptoms, if there's anything other than that you've seen.
You've largely summed it up. One of the ways that we put it as well, and this would go along with the fatigue and the agitation, is kind of just being groggy. And that seems to be the direction generally that over-medication goes. And if anybody has any questions about it as they're going through the process, oftentimes we'll just simply recommend that they go to rxlist.com, look up their medication, go to the side effects tab, scroll down, and sure enough, basically without fail, they can identify, right, there's the symptoms that I'm having, these side effects that are listed on the medication. Because when you have the medication potentiation or the over-medication taking place, the ability to have those side effects manifest, even though that you weren't having them before, is increased at that point in time. And so rxlist.com has been a fantastic tool for many people over the years to receive some clarity for what they're currently going through and to understand it's not the bipolar. Oh, it's not what my initial diagnosis was. It's the side effect of the medication, and it's listed right there in black and white. And so that's been a fantastic tool to help enlighten people to realize what they're working with, that it's not you, it's the medication that you have, and you just need to reduce the medication.
Yeah.
And it's going to go away. Yeah.
And then consistency is critical. Since I mentioned that already, I want to talk about that here, because, and one of the things that I do in my program that I'll mention is we set up like this tools that are going to help people to stay consistent. So when I was doing it, when I first started doing, this process, I missed med doses all the time. Like I just was not, I wasn't missing them every single day, but I would forget sometimes, and I wasn't using a pill organizer with my medications or anything like that. So there were a lot of times where I'm like, did I take my medication today? I can't remember. And I'm sure that contributed to the erratic symptoms that I experienced when I was on medication. But when I was going through this withdrawal process, Truehope's customer support was very adamant that I needed to make sure that I didn't miss doses. And I was trying to figure out, like, how do I make sure I remember that I take my doses? And I kind of went through a trial and error period. But what I landed on was how important it was for me to have pill organizers, because then I wouldn't be questioning whether I took my dose for the day. You also have to take, like, the medications and the micronutrients have to be taken, a certain amount of time apart. There's a lot of different details that have to be remembered in order to be consistent with taking these. So we use, I have people use alarms. I have them use a little chart for themselves that they, make their plan for the week so they can see when they need to take them. If they're going to be gone, we have them make sure that if they put a reminder alarm to remind them to take their medications and micronutrients with them, because you cannot miss doses. Like it's very important to make sure you're not missing doses of the medications. You're not missing doses of the micronutrients. You have to be super consistent with this process.
Consistency is key. 100%. In relation to the overall success, consistency is one of the main ingredients that cannot be removed from the process. Otherwise, failure is what most people can come to expect. And so, yes, absolutely. Consistency on the medications while you're withdrawing from them. Otherwise, unless you like going down rocky roads, it gets a little more bumpy. But, the more consistent you are with it, the smoother the transition will be off of the medication. But then also, obviously, the consistency on the Empower Plus, because as you're coming off that medication, what's replacing it? What's generating the support within the brain, making you function? And so the Empower Plus is absolutely crucial alongside whatever else they may have recommended. Maybe if somebody was suffering with generalized anxiety or something like that, they'd be taking the inositol on a regular basis as well. And, coming off the medications, they should be taking the free aminos. That's what it's called here in Canada, Amino Power Plus in the US, to help come off of those medications while eliminating withdrawal effects. Being consistent on whatever the recommendations are is going to much better ensure that you will have a very high level of success in coming off the medication safely and effectively and obtaining the mental health that you likely never even had in your life. But if you did at one point in time have stability in life, you're going to regain that, and you can expect to go beyond even that, beyond what you were accustomed to, even in a state of wellness before.
Yeah. And I mentioned this in a previous episode, but I was going through this process for like 5 or 6 months. And then one day I woke up and it felt like it was the first time I was awake in over a decade. And I called my husband. I called my husband. I was so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm awake. And he was nervous at first because he thought I was manic because I was so animated and excited. And so he's like, maybe you need to call your doctor. You know, he was very nervous, and rightly so. The man had been through a lot with me, right? But I kept trying to explain to him, I'm like, I'm not manic. I said, I haven't felt this way in years. Like, my brain feels awake. Is this what normal people feel like? I just kept saying, like, is this what normal people feel like? And I think, especially when you're kind of in that drugged state for extended periods of time, you forget what it feels like to feel normal. Like, you don't remember what it feels like for your brain to function in a healthy way, if it ever did. And it was such a blessing because I did not know my brain could feel like that. And that was just the beginning. Like, I was like, my brain is healed. It was like just the very, very beginning taste of what it was going to actually feel like later on. Mm-hmm. But that's one of the huge things. And I love watching people go through this process. Whenever somebody like quits before they get there, it makes me so sad because I'm like, oh, you don't understand how much better you can feel on this. It will change your life. Literally. It literally saved my life. I will forever be grateful to your dad and for all the people that made this supplement possible, because it literally saved my life. Quite literally. That is not hyperbole. That I'm not being, hyperbolic in that statement. I'm being very literal, that it literally saved my life.
We've gotten that so many times, and for your audience here, it's important to understand that oftentimes what we're working with is literally life and death situations, but let's even just hone in a little bit more, just into relationships and all that. I had the opportunity years ago. I used to be over the video department. I actually started the video department where we were categorizing all of the news articles that were being produced on us, the documentaries that were coming out, that type of thing. And I was digitizing them, and then I would disseminate them, all that type of stuff. And we developed this program where we started traveling around and we were doing video testimonials. And it was a lot of fun. And the reason why is, one, we were meeting all these different individuals, but hearing these fantastic stories. And the one opportunity I had in early 2007 was to interview a couple, a husband and wife, and the husband had just been suffering with bipolar for a lot of years, and it caused strain in their marriage. It caused strain in his relationship with his 3 sons. He wasn't as present of a father as he should have been, and he destroyed their finances significantly when he went into a complete manic state, and he purchased everything he ever wanted to purchase, and all of a sudden they're over $100,000 in debt. And I know it's not a lot of debt today, but back in the early 2000s, that, it was a little more. And, he's buying whatever vehicle he ever wanted, and just all sorts of stuff. And as well-meaning as he was, and, good-hearted as he was, he just wasn't in control of himself, and it was causing these issues. And so I interviewed them, and this is years after he got on the Empire Plus. And, he's talking about the fact that he has a relationship finally with his boys that he never had. And his boys are in their late teens, early 20s now. But he's finally able to have the relationship. He missed that whole window of time with them, right? But he's making up for it. And his wife, I interview her, and she's just bawling. And she's saying, I finally have the husband back that I had initially married. And, when you look at it, and there's lives being saved. In this situation, I don't think it was life and death. But in this situation, it was a marriage and a family that was being saved. And we hear this all the time. We hear this feedback, and it's what keeps me fueled up, right? Like, no amount of money in the world would ever replace the fact that I can go to bed at night knowing I made a difference in the world. Because I've had other opportunities in my life to go make money in a much more easy fashion than what we're doing here, and more money. But when I put it into the balances, I said, am I willing to leave off with this when I'm hearing this beautiful feedback? Am I willing to do that for some money? Like, am I going to feel as rewarded? And the simple answer was no. The simple answer was no. As long as I have food on my table, it doesn't matter, right? As long as my family's provided for, it doesn't matter, because the real reward in this is knowing that there are a lot of people being blessed in a significant way, in the same way that I've been blessed, my family's been blessed, that you've been blessed. And it's just a beautiful thing. And so thank you for sharing the fact that, as you put it so boldly, that this saved your life. And that's not uncommon.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't know that I was healing when I was healing. Like, I didn't really understand that. I didn't understand that it was possible to heal, because I had been so thoroughly indoctrinated in this idea that bipolar was a lifelong incurable condition. I would have it for the rest of my life. And I was grateful for Truehope, because I thought, man, this is really helping me, live better. Like, I was starting to have, be able to control myself. I was, especially like when I think I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, again, this is one of the things that I, reinforce all the time. Symptoms are information, and don't just live with the symptoms, figure out what the symptoms are trying to tell you. So, I had the experience after I'd been on Empower for a couple of years, where I'd had an outburst with my son. I was still continuing to get agitated. I was still struggling with anger. And I just happened to have one of those experiences with my son when Truehope called to check on me that day. Feels like divine intervention to me, honestly, because it had never occurred to me to talk to Truehope about this symptom, because I didn't view symptoms that way at the time. I just thought I didn't have any self-control, and I felt like a bad person, like a bad mom. And I was talking to her, and I was kind of frustrated. And she said, how's your day going? I'm like, not so great, and I just I don't know what made me say the things that I said to her, but I happened to mention this, like, I just don't have any control over my anger. And she asked me questions. This woman started asking me questions about it. And after a couple of minutes, she said, sweetie, you need salmon oil. And I remember, like, that phrase will stick in my head forever. She's like, sweetie, you need salmon oil. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, you need salmon oil. And I started taking a very high dose of salmon oil, and it resolved the problem. Like, all of a sudden I was able to control myself. I had been practicing mindfulness meditation. I've been doing all these other things to try and control this anger. But there was an essential nutrient that my brain was not getting, that it needed in order to produce whatever it was, in my brain, to help me control myself and be able to not flip out. And now, like, I used to be a really angry driver. I would, like, scream at people, stuff. I am totally chill when I drive now, So it's really important for people to understand that we've got to stop pathologizing these symptoms and lumping them into these groups, and recognize, like, this is your brain asking for help. Absolutely. What are the symptoms trying to say? And start listening to the symptoms and give your brain and your body what it needs to function in a healthy way.
Exactly. I know we've digressed from the medication aspect here, but did we talk about the 4 pillars of nutrition?
You mentioned it before, but will you repeat it in this one? Because I think that's a good thing to talk about here.
Yeah, because you brought up the salmon oil, and we don't sell salmon oil. And the reason being is that there's great salmon oils out there. We're not about just supplying any, a Me Too product and really commercializing what we're doing here. We just recommend that people go get a good omega-3 fatty acid. And oftentimes that's salmon oil. If you want a more immediate effect, because it's pre-converted, the salmon went and did the job for you. It converted, different forms of omega-3 fatty acid into a form. Actually, well, they probably got it from the krill, but down the road, at some point in time, it started off as a vegetable source omega-3 fatty acid, as ALA, and then it gets converted in our bodies, right, in fish's bodies, in the krill, whatever, into different forms of omega-3 fatty acids. So you have the DHA and the EPA already readily available to go straight to work, and the DHA is really, that's the docosahexaenoic acid, but that's really for cognition. It helps the brain, helps with mental health conditions, helps with ADHD. It's great, especially when it's not on its own. When you combine it with the other pillars of nutrition to make sure that there's synergy, that there's conversions taking place that need to take place. And so when we take a look at the 4 pillars of nutrition that really give us a strong support base, just like a 4-legged chair, that's vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and then omega fatty acids. And I still can't hold that one up on its own. I need to stretch it. So You have those 4 classes of nutrients, and they work synergistically together. Not one of them will do its full job without the others being present. And so that goes down the whole neurotransmitter pathways. It goes to the whole conversion in the human body of flax oil or hemp or chia, the omega-3 fatty acid being found in there, converting over to the DHA, DPA, and EPA necessary for your body to be healthy, your brain to thrive. And so, you really highlight that, okay, the Empower Plus got you to a certain place and was serving you quite well. But without that omega fatty acid, with you being deficient in the omega-3 fatty acids, you were never able to get fully to where you needed to be. And so once you introduce that, life-changing.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the other things that I want to talk about, so when I got onto this, I'm using anecdote just to kind of take us along the path, but I've moved a ton, like not across town like other states. We've lived in 6 states since my husband and I got married. And within the state we're living now, we've lived in 4 different places already. So hopefully we're not moving anymore. I'm sick of moving. But every time I would move, the first time I moved after I switched over to Empower, I started getting, I kind of got hypomanic during the moving phase, and then I got depressed afterwards. And it was a pretty significant depression. And it made me nervous because, again, the psychological dependence, this idea that I had this disease, this disorder that I would have forever. And I started worrying because I had been through this with medication. I started worrying that maybe that the micronutrients weren't working anymore, because I'd been through that with medication where I would be okay for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it wasn't working anymore. And I called Truehope in a panic one day. And I said, I'm depressed, and the micronutrients aren't working. And they asked me some questions. One of the things I love about this is that Truehope does not just shoot from, they don't shoot from the hip, that you guys don't just, spout off stuff. They always ask questions. There's always follow-up questions to get clear picture of what's going on. And they talked to me for the first time about a med release. I had never heard about medication, what a medication release was. And I said, but I've been off the medications. I can't remember how many months at that point. I want to say 8 or 9 months at that point. But they said your body stores this medication for up to 10 years in your soft tissues. And when you go through intense stress, it can push that medication back into your system. And so then you end up with medication that your body doesn't need anymore. And it's, I don't want to say toxic, but it's what it felt like to me. It was pretty bad depression. This was not it felt wrong. I don't know how to describe it, because there's a natural state of depression. There are times when we have bad things happen in our lives, and that is a natural state. This did not feel like a natural state of depression. And so that was the first time that I learned about a med release. And Truehope gave me the protocol for what to do to help mitigate that in my body. And I took care of that. And then we went through another move, and I went through med release again. And the third time it happened, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I talked to Truehope, and I said, I'm going to do a cleanse. I just want to get this out of my body. And they said, do not do that. That is unsafe. We don't have any idea how much of this medication is in your system. It could be very dangerous for you. This was one of those times when I learned the hard way. And so I went to a store and got a liver cleanse, and started a health food store, and started taking it. And I was so depressed. If I didn't know better, I would have ended up in the hospital. I was in bed, couldn't get out of bed. I was severely, severely depressed, and called Truehope crying and said, I didn't listen to you. I don't know what to do now. And they said, first of all, stop taking the liver cleanse. So I stopped taking that. And then I was drinking tons of whey protein isolate and taking tons of the aminos. And after about a week, it was out of my system and I was feeling better. And I was like, never again, never, ever, ever again. So can you talk about what that is? What was I going through? It's very frustrating for some people when they learn this, because they're like, well, it feels hopeless, but it's not actually hopeless. I think that it's helpful to understand this, because forewarned is forearmed, right? So let's talk about what was happening to me each time that happened.
Well, it depends on the medication that you were pushing into your bloodstream and the effect that it was having in your neurochemistry. But I want to add to that real quickly here, because patience is a virtue, especially when it comes to the medication reduction process. And then even just after the medication is out, like you're communicating there. When we say that it can store up to 10 years in your system, that's actually just a hypothetical. I've worked personally with people that have been off medications for longer than 10 years. And I don't want to communicate a lack of hope here that, oh boy, I'm going to be dealing with this for the rest of my life. No, when we're on nutrition, we detox faster than when we're not on nutrition. So I've literally worked with people that have been off medications for longer. I'm thinking of one particular situation at hand here where this individual wasn't on our supplements. They had used our supplements over a decade before to get off the medication and then dropped the supplements, dropped the medication, and just coasted through life and did better than they were when they're on the medication, but they were unstable. And they ended up getting onto the Empower Plus again through associating with me. And this is over a decade later. And they started pushing meds again. This is over a decade. They hadn't touched medications. And so they can store for who knows how long, right? Depending on the circumstances that you're generating. Now, like I said, when you're on the nutrition, you will detoxify on a regular basis. It becomes a normal everyday process, which is good, but it can come with its quirks as well, as you're pushing stuff out, but it's better out than in. Now, I want to communicate the severity of the liver cleanse and consider yourself blessed. Yeah. There's another individual I know personally, and they got well after a lifetime of being very unwell. They got well, were very successful in relation to going and even telling their story. So this wasn't just marginally better. No, it actually became their career that they were going and communicating to others their story when Truehope used to be associated with an MLM years ago. And this individual, her and her husband, they went to a naturopathic doctor who recommended do this liver cleanse. They did it, and it pushed so much meds that this individual forgot who they were. They didn't even know who they were for like 5 days and never fully came out of it. It caused brain damage to the point that they never fully came out of it and developed even an accent. Literally, like the speech was different, markedly different than it was before. And then it was kind of rocky road after that, up and down, never going back to where they had once been. And it's because they literally overdosed on medication that was stored in their system and they pushed it out too fast. So we are very, very strong advocates that you do not touch the liver.
Yeah.
Not in a profound way, especially when you have Empower Plus. If you don't have Empower Plus, can you push the liver a little more? Probably. But it's because your brain chemistry or your brain can handle it more when it's not nutrient. But it'd be like me just going taking a handful of antipsychotics or something like that. And what's going to happen, right? Like I could die from it, right? My propensity to have negative impacts from it is higher than somebody who may qualify for a diagnosis of psychosis, right?
Yeah.
So that's so important there in relation to following those rules, right? That have been established for very good purpose. So consider yourself blessed. But yeah, so as to what you were working with, basically what's happening is you have normalized brain chemistry. You've just pushed a ton of medication out into your system, and you are going to go into an intense state of overmedication. And once again, RX list is your best friend when it comes to that, to identifying, look at that. I'm experiencing 2/3 out of the totality of the side effects listed on these 2 pages, right?
Right.
And I just feel like a complete mess.
Yeah, and there were things that Truehope, because I was getting aggravated with this, what was happening, and so I was asking, okay, well, what causes these med releases? So I want to go back, make sure that I'm saying this right. So my understanding is the medication gets stored in the soft tissues of your body, and something about stressors on the body pushes that medication out of the soft tissues into the bloodstream. And one of the other things that I discovered was causing this was I love to do triathlons, and I'm a super competitive person. And so I was doing super intense training. Like, I don't know how to do things part way. So it wasn't like, let's do a triathlon and we'll just kind of dabble in it. I was like, went and bought books on it, and I was creating this really intense training schedule and stuff. And while I was doing the training, I started experiencing symptoms. And called Truehope and found out like you cannot do this intense training right now because it is pushing medication back into your system. Like that intense training is stress on the body that is pushing those medications back out into your body.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
Well, that's absolutely accurate.
Okay.
And the main antidote, though not a full antidote, but the main antidote to it is increased whey protein isolate on a regular basis. So some people will be like doing 2, 3, 4 scoops throughout the day. So they have a constant release of amino acids into the bloodstream so that when the medications are pushed out of the soft tissue, that there's something to bind up to them to pull them out. So one, reducing the effects that the medications are having, and 2, facilitating the ability for them to be able to actually flush out of your system rather than the body saying, whoa, put it back into storage. This is, destructive stuff. When you knock them out of storage, you want them out, but it doesn't eliminate the overall effect. So it's still not advisable to just go and do that type of intense training unless you've put it to the test and you know that you can do it, but that you want to work your way up to it, right? That you don't just start overnight and then you sound similar to me, you sound similar to my dad, where it's like, hey, if I'm going to do something, we're all in, like all in, like it's all or nothing. And it's a funner way to live life, I can tell you that. But sometimes the unintended effects are not desirable.
Yeah. So we've talked about the sources of symptoms of overmedication, withdrawal, med release. One other thing I think is important to talk about is gut health. So if you do not have, and there's a lot more, I think people are starting to understand better, because there's more information, there's more research being done, and more, it's being talked about more, how we have to have healthy guts in order for our body to absorb nutrition and nutrients into our body, right? And if your gut is not healthy, you can take nutrients all day long and your body is just not going to be able to absorb it in adequate levels, right? And so I want to talk about that a little bit because I don't think people really understand that piece.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that the gut is the gateway to health. That's health, not hell, health. And so it's the gateway to health, and without a properly operating gut or healthy intestinal tract, you are not going to thrive. And it's multifaceted in this way. One, a lot of neurotransmitters are actually produced in the gut. So if you have gut dysbiosis, if you don't have a healthy gut flora, if you have an imbalance in bacteria and whatnot, or you have candida overgrowth that's taking place, you're likely not producing the neurotransmitters that you need to be in the gut that are then going to absorb into the bloodstream and go and work for you. So there's that aspect. The second aspect is going back to the candida overgrowth, candida albicans, parasites, that type of thing, which are more common than we're being told, and part of the root of disease as well in many aspects, because they will actually rob you of nutrition as well. So you're not getting it out of your food as much as you should be, and you're not getting it out of your supplements as much as you should be when you have fungal overgrowth like candida and or parasitic overgrowth. And oftentimes they go hand in hand as they both thrive within the same environment. So they kind of work synergistically together, or symbiotically, if you will. And so if you have something like that in your gut, if you do a candida self-test and you are, off the charts type of thing, which a lot of people actually are, those are things that you want to address, that you'll actually need to address before you can ever expect high health outcomes in relation to any protocols that you're doing. And so that's why we've actually developed the Candida protocol over the years. I started developing that, I believe, probably, I'm going to guess, around 03, 04, somewhere around there is when we started to really develop the Candida protocol, because we recognized the need for it, where if somebody came to us, let's say they weren't even on medications, so we don't even have that as a factor in all of this. So it should be as simple as pop the top of the bottle, take the pills, take the capsules, the 36 ingredients, you're going to do well. Voila. Should be that simple. And if they weren't adequately responding, that's like, okay, well, why aren't they responding? And, vast majority of the time came down to, candida overgrowth. The candida is actually consuming the nutrition. You're actually feeding the candida. You're making it more resilient, stronger, or same with parasites. You're feeding them. They like good nutrition too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're consuming it first and you're not getting it. And so when we would deal with that, then all of a sudden they would just do better. They would do better all around, and their digestion would increase, and their bowels would clear up. Things just got better all around, that now, bang for their buck, they're getting more out of their supplementation, bang for their buck, they're getting more out of their food, and overall, they're just thriving. They've lit up, their overall health is doing much better. And so those are the main aspects surrounding gut health, is that, candida overgrowth, parasites, either or, right? And having to address those and making sure that we're absorbing the nutrition, that we're getting the nutrition, and that you've got a good, healthy gut flora that's facilitating already the production of neurotransmitters before it even has an opportunity for the nutrition to get into the bloodstream.
Yeah. And I've, over the years, I started taking, because I had to go through the Candida protocol a few times over the years. And one of the things that I discovered was actually causing a problem for me was when I would take antibiotics. I had no idea that taking an antibiotic was going to destroy my gut. And so I had a few times when I was frustrated going through that Candida protocol, because it takes 3 months to, get everything fixed. And it's a lot of regimented, taking, having the pill organizer again and, doing all the things, because it's, taking the probiotics and taking the olive leaf extract or the things that are antifungal. It's complicated for 3 months. So it was really annoying to me. And after the third time, I was like, what is going on? What am I doing wrong? And I called Truehope to talk to them about it. And they helped me understand. They asked me, I think that was, again, a question. They said, well, have you taken any antibiotics recently? And I'm like, oh yeah, I had really bad bronchitis this winter and I had a Z-Pack. They said, okay, in the future, if you need to take an antibiotic, before you do that, call us. And we will help you mitigate the effects of that antibiotic so that you don't completely destroy your gut health. So after that, I've never had the problem again. Anytime, awesome. I don't take antibiotics very often anyway, but there were a couple times after that I did. And I called Truehope right away. They gave me a protocol to make sure that I mitigated the effects of that. So there's just that's one of the reasons why I am so grateful for Truehope's customer support. Mm-hmm. So grateful, because there are so many things that we don't understand. And unless you've gone to school, not school, but unless you've learned about all of these different details and stuff, I'm always amazed at how much the customer support understands and knows. They'll say, oh, well, this is why this is happening, or this is why this is happening. And I'm so grateful to the customer support. There was a time when Truehope's supplements were being sold through a MLM. And I had family members that knew I was taking it. So they called me to, they wanted to do a presentation for me or whatever. And I said, nope, sorry. I cannot lose Truehope's customer support. I am not switching to another source. I need to stay with Truehope because I trust the customer support. I don't know what I'm doing. And even over the years, I've been on this for 15 years. There are still times when I need to call and say, okay, something's funky, something going on. My husband lost a job and it was a tremendously stressful time. And I called him. I'm like, I can feel myself getting depressed. And okay, we need to increase your nutrient intake right now because you're under a lot of stress and you're burning through it faster. Things like that. I wouldn't know intuitively. I have to call Truehope and say, okay, what do I do right now? Something's not right.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The beautiful thing is that we've taken such a scientific approach from day one, where tracking of symptoms is taking place, database was established, and we literally have over 100,000 files on database, and they highlight and identify certain patterns. And when you see a pattern emerge enough times, you can say, this seems to be exactly what you anticipate given these particular circumstances. And so we were able to narrow things down, even coffee consumption, how that's impacting, one's mental health, and that, hey, somebody who's drinking 5-6 cups of coffee, absolutely not. If you want to get well, you got to stop that. You got to, because you're constantly consuming literally a stimulant, one that's in the same class in essence, even though it's coming from a natural source, but it's alongside things like Adderall and Concerta and Dexagen and whatever. Like you're messing with your brain, right? And you're actually messing with your serotonin levels. Coffee, one of the reasons why people are addicted is because it enhances serotonin production, makes them feel really nice. And so, we've been able to identify those things, and that's fantastic. So that then when, a new staff member comes in, they're able to be trained on this. And that knowledge is, kind of hardwired into the computers, literally with the database, that we have all that information there. It's not so easy lost. And, you can actually anticipate that you're going to get somebody on the phone that's going to be able to assist you through the process in a very professional way, regardless of credentials. Why? Because we pioneered this field of mental health and we're actually training doctors on it. The uneducated is training the highly educated. That's backwards, but it's appropriate given the circumstances because we developed these protocols. We've figured these things out through hard experience that others weren't having, that weren't going through that experience. So we've really pioneered in that field. But going back to the whole antibiotic thing, it's interesting because, I just want to touch on this real quick. I mean, there's a fantastic herbal antibiotic. There's so many fantastic herbal antibiotics that don't create the gut dysbiosis that pharmaceutical antibiotics create. And that gut dysbiosis, the destruction of the gut flora, is what generally results in increased depression and all sorts of other symptoms. And so the olive leaf extract, this is a Canadian label, Canadian bottle, but the olive leaf extract is a phenomenal antibiotic. It's what we use for the antifungal for knocking back candida, but it's antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, antiparasitic, and it's a phenomenal antioxidant as well. So it's just an all-around fantastic herb, and it doesn't create the gut dysbiosis. It just seems to knock back the opportunistic pathogens that are reaping havoc within us.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many good products that you guys have done such phenomenal research and pioneered. Like you said, you guys are pioneers in this field, and it's incredible. And one thing that we're going to come to a close here, but one thing I want to reiterate and maybe talk just a little bit about is the 2 keys to success with getting off of medications, getting onto micronutrients, and helping the underlying sources of these symptoms heal are patience and consistency. And talking about the patience piece, one of the things that's interesting, there's a lot more information out there now on social media about people getting off of medications. And so they go through, I've seen so many accounts with people are talking about their withdrawal process for medications, and it'll go on for years. Like you have to go super slow on their taper because the withdrawals are so awful, and it'll take them years. And that sounds like a lot of people think like, I don't want to do that. Like, why would I do that? And I always am so sad. Frequently, I'll go on there and I'll say, have you tried like adding in a micronutrient to that process? Because even though it sounds like a long time, Truehope significantly cuts down on the withdrawal time. One of the things that is in the book, The Better Brain, they talk about how the average withdrawal time based on, depending on the medications you are on, when you get on Truehope's product are 6 to 12 months, which is significantly lower than any, what I'm seeing on social media where people are going through this withdrawal process for like 3 years, right? Because they have to go down so slow. And the withdrawal symptoms are significantly mitigated because you're actually healing the brain. And the way that Truehope approaches this is, waiting until there's an indication of that, medication. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting the word, but potentiation. We're waiting for that to start to happen. And then we go down. And what I have seen, I'll just mention this here too, is people will experience, the overmedication symptoms, and they will, I always say, call Truehope right away. And if they recommend a reduction, usually 48 to 72 hours of that, I don't know if it's the medication potentiation lasting that long or if it's withdrawal, but it's about 48 to 72 hours is what I've seen on average. I don't know what other people are experiencing. So it doesn't last forever. And when we create that withdrawal pattern, that, titration pattern, they can see what's happening. So as they've gone through a couple of cycles of this reduction, they can start to see the pattern that they have. And they say, okay, about every 3 to 4 weeks is when I start to get over medicated. And then this will last for about 72 hours, and then I'll be okay for another, 3 to 4 weeks. And when they start to see that, then it makes it easier for them so that when they start to go into over medication, they can look at their chart and like, oh, it's been about 4 weeks since I reduced. It might be time to do that again. And they can call Truehope. But it's so important to be patient with this process, though. You don't want to go off too quickly. You don't want to, I've seen that happen before, and it always makes me sad when somebody's like, I don't want to do this any longer. I just want to go off, and they'll just go off their medications, and then they end up in like severe withdrawal. I saw somebody one time that went into protracted withdrawal. And so then they were dealing with these withdrawal symptoms much longer than they would have if they had just been patient with the process.
Exactly. And, so you have the patience and you have the consistency, and a big part of it actually leading up to that is the trust. And I know sometimes it's hard. It's, you're dealing with an organization outside of the mainstream. You're not dealing with mainstream medical system that naturally is, that trust is instilled in us as we grow up, as we're taught in school and all this type of stuff. That's the highest level of healthcare, especially in the Western world, right? Our healthcare dominates all other healthcare is what we're taught in essence. But when we take a look at it, they're not able to do what they need to do in relation to mental health. Mental health outcomes have gotten worse progressively over the decades, which shows that they've failed miserably. And so it's hard to put your trust in something else or someone else. But in relation to this, I mean, if you can move forward with a level of trust, then that patience and the consistency, is enhanced significantly. That, compliance isn't an issue, because compliance issues. I mean, we've worked with individuals for a couple of years where you finally have to say, maybe you wanted to go do something else because compliance has been an issue where they bombshell themselves, they hit rock bottom, and then you have to pick them back up, and then they're doing good again, they're starting to get there, and all of a sudden they do it again. And it's a self-sabotaging behavior, and they never get well because they keep on taking things into their own hands, and compliance is a major issue. So compliance wouldn't be an issue if trust was there. And so there's that aspect as well, as if you learn to just trust, right? And I don't advocate blindly trusting in anybody, but trust. Go and research, go figure it out, go look at the science, go look at the studies, go look at, testimonials, go talk to people, establish that trust. And you'll find that your success rate is much higher. And then going to the, what was I going to mention? I think it was in relation to the withdrawing off of medications. So there's different ways that it can be done. And we've taken, or the 6 to 12 months, that's what it was 6 to 12 months coming off of medications on average, based on what was mentioned in The Better Brain by Dr. Bonnie Kaplan and Dr. Julia Ruckledge. Well, I would say in the vast majority of circumstances, it's actually quite a bit less than that. And if somebody were just working with me personally and they were just on a simple, just an antidepressant, they weren't on a benzo or something like that. If they were working with myself and my wife used to do a lot more support than I've dabbled in it, just enough to understand it enough to be able to speak effectively to it. But if they were working personally with us, we would generally be looking at doing reductions. We fast track it, and we would increase the dosage higher on the Empower Plus, which causes you to need to withdraw faster, right? Off the medication. So there's different ways of doing it. And Truehope's taking a more safe approach right now, oftentimes in how they're doing it. But we're using some of the older protocols that used to be in place, and they can be equally as effective, but you need maybe a little bit more attention given to the particular individuals as you're doing it. But you increase the dosage of the Empower Plus, which causes the overmedication to happen faster, which means you need to withdraw faster. And oftentimes we can have somebody off of a standard antidepressant within about 3 weeks fully, and they do fine, right? But you just need to be more careful while you're going through it that way. There's variations to it, but yeah, so anywhere between generally 3 weeks to, it depends on the individual, if they're on a benzodiazepine or something like that. Sometimes it's a year-long withdrawal process, and that's when it gets long and arduous, and it's really unfortunate, but it's still worth it because it's a much better quality of life that they obtain through the process than they previously had.
Absolutely. So I will, as I mentioned before, I've been off of these medications for 15 years now, and my life is totally different. I couldn't have imagined the life that I have now. And I want to go back just a little bit to make sure that we have not scared anybody about the med release thing. Med release it's just a reality that it is what it is, right? You've been on this medication. This is a reality. And I feel like understanding what could potentially happen and what the symptoms mean helps to mitigate all of that, because when I did go through, once I understood, what med release was, after I had my unfortunate experience with the liver cleanse, I never did it again. And when we moved again, I already knew, okay, so I stopped training for triathlons. Sometimes I would do road races, but I didn't do intense exercise. I would just kind of I'm very consistent with, walking. I don't run anymore. Unfortunately, I'm getting too old. My knees don't like it, but I know I do exercise consistently because that is good for my mental health, but I don't do super intense exercise anymore. I could probably try it now. I just don't have any desire to do it anymore, frankly. But once I understood what was happening, if I started to have a med release, I started to understand what that looked like for me. And I would call Truehope and say, I'm in a med release. And then they would just, I always called Truehope. I didn't ever just do it myself because there were often like variables that I wasn't thinking about where Truehope had improved their protocols. They had improved their knowledge at that point, because it had been a couple of years. And so it was always helpful for me to call Truehope and say, okay, what do I do? I think I'm having a med release. I would tell them the circumstances and the symptoms I was experiencing. And I would start drinking whey protein isolate 4 times a day. Increase my fiber too, because all that protein going into my body didn't make my digestive system super happy. Mm-hmm. But it just made it so I could handle it, and it was once in a while. It wasn't happening all the time. It wasn't on a regular basis. I was having this like once every couple of years I would go through this, right? And over time, it just got to the point where my body was healed. I didn't have medication in my system anymore, and everything is great. And in the past, if I missed doses of Truehope, I noticed it. But I had something happen last year where I was gone away at a retreat for a few days and left my pills sitting on my counter in my bathroom and freaked out when I got up there. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't go with, 3 days without my micronutrients. But I couldn't do anything about it. Like I panicked. I was too far away. I was like 3 hours away from home. I was too far to ask my husband to drive him to me. So I was just like crossing my fingers. I hope I survive the weekend. Right. And I had this worry in the back of my head because I had not gone that long without them in years. And I was fine. I was tired by the end of the week, by the end of those 3 days. Like I could tell, like I haven't taken my micronutrients, but I didn't become symptomatic. I wasn't because my brain had healed. And I was, and I'm forever grateful. I will never stop taking Truehope supplements because they give my brain what it needs to function in a healthy way. Like it's kind of like stopping eating. Like now that I know my brain needs this and I can't get it through my diet, why would I stop taking that? Mm-hmm. And so it's not like I had somebody say, well, do you have to take those for the rest of your life? And I'm like, I get to take them for the rest of my life. Like, I am so grateful that I have them. Like, why? I'm not going to stop eating. Do you have to eat for the rest of your life? Yes, of course I have to eat for the rest of my life. Right. So anyway.
Yeah. What an inconvenience that we have to keep on, drinking, right? Like, that's just so unfortunate that we have to drink. Do we have to do that for the rest of our life?
I know.
If you want to live, you do. Yeah. And if you want to live well.
Well, and that's the thing that's so incredible is one other thing that I want to mention here, just so that we're kind of rounding out the talk about, symptoms, is there are other sources of symptoms that people can have that will lead to symptoms of bipolar. And so somebody could have like severe trauma in their childhood that doesn't get resolved, causes dysregulation in the brain. You develop unhealthy coping mechanisms as a result that then continues to produce symptoms. We can have, again, we've talked about the symptoms that can come from drug use, and it can come from illicit drug use as well as prescription drug use. Like you can get these symptoms, that come from those sources. But getting Truehope into my system, helping my brain heal from the effects of the medication, getting the adequate levels of micronutrients so that my brain could function in a healthy way, actually cleared the way for me to resolve the other sources of symptoms. It made it possible for me to process emotions in a healthy way so that when I figured out how to use therapy to heal, that I was actually able to heal. Like I was able to go in and handle going through EMDR to process severe trauma in my past. And I was able to, work with the therapist, and my brain was functioning in a healthy way so that I could actually resolve, acknowledge, recognize, and resolve unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so it's really important to remember, again, symptoms are information. And we need to look at the symptoms for what they are. Our brain is communicating a need. Instead of just trying to shut it up, I think I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, I heard this really fantastic thing from Dr. Joseph Witt-Doerring on social media, where he said, taking an antidepressant when you're depressed is like turning the fire alarm off. There's a fire. It doesn't resolve the fire. It just shuts off the alarm.
Absolutely. And the same thing goes with pain meds and all that type of stuff. All you're doing is shutting off, in essence, the fire alarm. You're shutting off signaling in the body, and that signaling is necessary to get the body to do certain things. So I can attest to that. An example is I shattered my arm a few years back in a car accident, flipped over from the wind, blew the trailer over, the truck went with it, and my arm blew through the window and drug in the ditch. Literally completely snapped.
So painful.
Oh, it was amazing, really. Great experience when I look back at it, but Had a little bit of trauma associated because I thought my arm was actually decapitated because it wasn't where I thought I was holding it, because there was a 90-degree bend in my bicep with the arm dangling down and blood dripping. But anyways, so
trigger warning, by the way.
So they get me into the ambulance and they immediately put a little PICC line in me, right? I'm like, oh, what are you putting that there for? Well, it's so that we can put morphine into you. I said, you're not putting morphine into me? Absolutely not. And they're like, oh, okay, right? Like, that's standard protocol. No, not going to happen. So, okay, whatever. So I get into the emergency room, Canada Medicine here, Canadian Socialized Medicine. It took them 4.5 hours before they were cleaning up my large open wounds and stuff like that on my arm. And they finally got a cast on the arm, a Shikertong cast, to hold it in a position so that hopefully the bones would fuse back together, because it was completely severed. Unfortunately, it didn't come protruding through the muscle though, otherwise it would have been surgery. So anyways, the doctor comes and says, there's no badges of honor here for, bravery. Like, you can just take the medication. I said, I'm not going to take the medication. Yeah, it hurts. It should hurt, but I'm not that much in pain, which is probably due to the fact that I also have natural painkillers in me at all times, not shutting off receptors or shutting off signaling, but things like organic sulfur, methylsulfonylmethane and stuff like that, which is a natural painkiller, natural anti-inflammatory, good for joint health, good for your knees so you can keep on running, that type of thing, right? And so I constantly have these, and it's a mineral. So I have these things in my bloodstream throughout the day, every day. And so I probably don't feel pain like most people do. And so what was interesting though, is he's like, tomorrow the pain's going to be worse. And it wasn't. And there's something to that, because it likely would have had I been on the pain meds, because I would have shut off the initial pain signaling that would have allowed the body to start dealing with it. And then the next day, all of a sudden, the pain that I didn't experience would probably be exponentiated. Whereas progressively, day after day, it just got better. Like, the pain reduced on its own, the way that it probably should have, because I refused to take a pain med to suppress, to shut off the fire alarm, to prevent the body from ultimately acting and responding the way that it should do in a normal, healthy environment. So the same thing with an antidepressant, absolutely. Yeah. That when you start taking these medications, you are literally just either shutting things off. Well, generally you're just shutting things off, like serotonin, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. You're shutting off the ability for it to reuptake the serotonin. Antipsychotics oftentimes are just dopamine blockers. It's just blocking it, suppressing it. So it's not healthy for the body to just shut those processes off. You want to embrace those processes and just make sure that they're put into a functional state by supplying all of the nutrition that you needed all along.
Yeah. This has been phenomenal. I'm so glad that we did this series, because I think that there are a lot of things that people don't really understand about micronutrition. They don't understand, again, because we have pathologized these symptoms and we have created a medical diagnosis out of it. There's this psychological dependence on medications. There's this idea that we have to take medications. People accept the idea that the best they can expect out of their life is learning how to suffer well with their disorder, right? And the reality is that people do not have to live with this for the rest of their lives. The reality is that it is possible to address the underlying sources of the symptoms, heal the brain, and help it function in a healthy way. And if you have other additional sources of symptoms, if there have been if you have trauma in your past, this micronutrients helps, number one, resolve one of the underlying sources of your symptoms, because most people don't get a sufficient level of nutrition. And so that's why there has been such a dramatic increase in the number of people being diagnosed with these quote unquote disorders. But then it also makes it possible for you to actually process those, the trauma, to get your brain functioning in a healthy way so that you can then do the work necessary to heal the other sources of your symptoms. And I am proof. People question me all the time. I am going to say this on here because people question me all the time. They're like, well, you won't know until like 3 years down the road when you have your next episode. And I'm like, I actually do know. We have been through some of the most incredible stressors over the past 5 years in our family. We've lost a child. We've had to move, we had to sell under distressing circumstances. We lost a job and went with a couple of years without a job. Like, we have been through intense major stressors, and I've not become symptomatic. Like, I've had normal emotional responses to it, but it wasn't like distressing, ending up in the hospital, ending up dysfunctional. I can absolutely say without any hesitation, I know that I have healed. I am completely recovered. I would never be diagnosed with a mental health disorder anymore because I don't have those issues any longer. I have resolved all the underlying sources of the symptoms and I have healed. It is possible to completely recover. It is possible to heal.
I think, it's something I can relate to, but just the loss of a child, that alone is about as much as you can be put to the test. And if you pass that test without ending up in that situation, that in itself speaks volumes. And sadly, my wife and I can attest to that as well, having lost a child. I don't think there's anything worse that a parent can go through than losing a child. So that in itself, I think, is the answer right there. Are you well? Did you make it through that? Yep. Yeah. If you make it through that without losing your mind, then I think you're pretty stable. I think your mind is healed. I think your brain is working the way that it's supposed to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there any last comments, any final words that you want to offer to the audience? Sorry, that's putting you on the spot.
No, that's okay. No, I think we covered off the medication thing pretty well enough that hopefully it instills a level of confidence in people that when they phone the Truehope Support Center, that they're willing to take the advice that's been solidly established over 25 years now. I mean, it started almost 30 years ago, but it's been well documented now for well over 25 years. So, I think we've done a good enough job there without getting into the nitty gritty, because oftentimes the nitty gritty isn't even applicable to many people. I mean, there's so many different pathways that they end up going based on the medications that they're on, the cocktail medications, right? How long they've been on them, what's going on in their life. I mean, the protocol is going to be custom tailored for them. And so I think we did a fairly good job there in communicating that. In relation to the overall Truehope story, there is the Epiphany film that was recently produced, and maybe we want to put that in the notes there. Phenomenal, very emotionally compelling film. Very well done. Independent film producers looked at it and said, this story needs to be told. And he went out on a limb and he produced it, and it's generating some fantastic feedback. And so perhaps that making that film available would be a great thing. But aside from that, I've got nothing else for today that I'm aware of.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. And I do want to tell the audience, if you are not already a member of the Upsiders Tribe and you do want to go through the healing process and you want support going through this process, the Upsiders Tribe will offer that support. We have 7 modules in that program. It's based on my book, The Upside of Bipolar, 7 Steps to Heal Your Disorder. And there's an entire chapter dedicated to the cross titration process. I talk about my own experience with it. I talk about the Truehope story. I talk about the lessons that I learned. And each, there's talk about overmedication and withdrawal and med releases. So that's a really fantastic resource. So I would encourage you, if you have not read that book yet, please go get a copy of the book. And if you would like help walking through this healing process, please make sure you check out the Upsiders Tribe. And if you are ready to get started with Truehope, I will make sure that this is linked in the show notes, but please give them a call. Go to their website. They've got all kinds of resources on there for you to learn more about, like David talked about, like gaining trust in what they have to offer. They have a tab there that goes through all of the studies that have been done on there. You can go through and see, and I love that it's broken down by category. So if you have somebody that you love, or if you struggle with ADHD symptoms, there's studies on ADHD, there's studies on OCD, there's studies on bipolar. It's really phenomenal that all of that research is there. And this is all independent research. Truehope did not commission any of this research. This is all research that has been done independent of them, because there are doctors and researchers that recognize the value of what they have, and they were curious about application in certain areas. So they would take it and they would test it. And this is all the results of those studies. That was actually what convinced my doctor to give me the go ahead to try it, was looking at the research that had been done on this product. And he said, well, this looks like a viable option, and I will forever be grateful that he was open to that, because I don't know if I would have trusted it if it hadn't been that way. Now I look back and I'm like, who cares what he said? I need to trust my own intuition, and this like literally saved my life. And then the other thing that's on there is Truehope has a lot of products out, that are available now that, in addition to Empower Plus, like you talked about the olive leaf extracts, you talked about the amino power. There are a lot of products in there, and you can go in there and learn about what the product does. And again, the best resource is Truehope's customer support. They are phenomenal. They really help you understand the process. They will walk you through that process. They will guide you. And if you decide to do this, listen to them. Follow their instructions to the T, and you will be successful in getting off the medications and helping your brain heal and moving forward on the path to recovery.
Awesome. What you're doing is amazing, Michelle. The resources that you're providing and just some accolades for your book. Very well written. So just awesome. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I was not trolling for a compliment, but I appreciate it.
Well, compliments due where credit is due where I'm lacking the words now.
I know, we're tired.
two podcasts today. This is the second one. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, David. And I am confident we'll have you on again in the future. But thank you for this last 3 episodes have been phenomenal. And again, if you have not listened to the previous 2 episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to them. They are so informative. There's so much great information that will help you understand how to help heal your brain using micronutrition. All right. Thank you very much, David.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Until next time, Upsiders.